everybody, and thank you for joining us for this month's Fireside chat. I'm joined today by Max, who's one of our Copilot adoption specialists, and also the members of our customer advisory panel, who will be sharing, some of them will be sharing their hands-on experience with Copilot. So, with the wider availability of Copilot, I'm really hoping this will be quite an informative discussion. I think we'll have some mixed views depending on where different people are on their Copilot journey and their experiences to date. And I'm really excited to hear about challenges that we face in adoption, but also those kind of hero moments, right? The things that kind of really jump out as game changers if they exist for Copilot. My name is Rob Quickenden. I'm the CTO here at Cisilion and I'm a Microsoft MVP. So I'm obviously relatively pro these Microsoft technologies, but I think the goal of today is to keep this really quite open and honest about our feedback. As an organisation, we've been working with different companies since around June when Copilot went into what was called the early access preview. That was a paid program, 300 seats minimum. And we're now, of course, working with far more organisations since Microsoft have released the guardrails for Copilot. So for those of you that aren't aware, up until the 15th of January, if you wanted to invest or try Copilot, you had to buy 300 licenses and commit up front. You now only have to buy one, which I think is a bit crazy, but on a different level, you only have to buy one of those licenses now. So, of course, that's changed lots of things. As such, we see lots of pockets in different organisations asking IT and asking finance to spend £25 a person a month for a Copilot license. And of course, the question that everybody wants to understand, of course, is Copilot worth it? Does it live up to the hype? And how quickly do we measure or even determine what a return on investment looks like? So I'm going to hand over to our incredible panel now. Thank you, all of you, for joining. Be great if we just quickly go around the virtual table. I'll call your name. Just please say who you're from. And if you could just give a very quick intro to, how many Copilot licenses have you got, if you've bought any? And, have you so far found any aha or hero moments, depending on what social channels that that you want to have a look at? So welcome everybody. I'm going to start off with, who do I know that's got some licensing? Alex. Oh, you're muted, Alex.
Hello, Alex Taylor, Group IT Director for AWIN. We've recently purchased 300 licenses for Copilot. We're still in the early phases of our deployment, so some of the technical teams have them, and some few non-technical people. We are setting up, we have set up an AI task force more broadly inside the business, which Copilot obviously slots into. So from a IT perspective, we want to just simply enable the licenses. We want the business to look at it and test it to understand if it's beneficial for what they need in a day-to-day perspective. Initial results, I think, are very positive on the summarizations that it can do, specifically in Teams and Outlook. It does save quite a bit of time if you're scrolling through multiple chats. That's the main feedback for now. Like I say, we haven't had it for too long to really kick the tires. Some Word bits and pieces have been done, but mainly it's just waiting for all of the different bits to light up in the different apps.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. Dave.
Thank you. Dave Maskell, Head of IT and Information Security at Thatcham Research. I think for us, we're at an early experimental stage. We've got a small handful of licenses, mainly within IT at this stage. So it's very much a pre-pilot. Within the team, I think the feedback is very similar to Alex in that Teams and Outlook is where it tends to shine. Summarization. A great example for me was that I travelled off-site yesterday. Lots of Teams chats were going on. I could quickly ask for a summarization of the chat through that day. And for the most part, it got the key elements of that back forward and presented to me. So that I can see that's where it's at in time. Wider usage, still early days, really. So I think the key thing for me is that I'm probably certainly within Thatcham Research, not going to be able to just turn the licenses on. I'd need to handhold and give people insight as to how to use it.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Dave. Go.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yes, so Gohar Mohammed. I'm the group head of information security at L&Q. I'm basically heading up the AI steering group in our organisation. So this is covering things like Copilot and our overall strategy and a different angle as well from the technology standpoint for sure. We've got around about 30 licenses, 25, 30 licenses across tech and infosec. So infosec to break and tech to embrace and see what it can offer. And the early feedback and approach really has been similar, which is from a recap standpoint, the team's functionality and doing the recap is brilliant because it breaks down by who and what. We've also found an interesting flaw, which is if you're sharing your camera and someone says something, it will capture it as that person who's logged in, which is interesting as opposed to capturing it as the person who actually said it. But overall, early, and I think it will get better, but I think we're just finding different ways of using it. So that's kind of where we're at. So it's very interesting at the moment.
Fantastic. Thank you. And who else have we got? Madassa.
Yeah, hi, my name's Madassa from Waverton. I am a CIO for the Waverton group. So we've actually purchased around about 20 licenses, and our approach has very much been similar to the current panels, where we've actually initiated an AI working group to support the wider business with the testing of the Copilot tool itself. The purpose obviously is to kind of educate ourselves and create a governance model to ensure we've effectively aligned our understanding and core responsibilities before we even consider rolling this out to the wider business. In addition to that, I was quite fortunate to also engage with a reseller where we've actually had a Copilot readiness workshop to help us and guide us through some of the typical objectives around licensing readiness, technical readiness, security adoption, and the whole change management piece. So we've completed that more recently, and I guess from the initial feedback, and now that we've actually rolled out the Copilot tool to some of our users on that working group as a result, I think similar feedback has been around Outlook, Teams. I think those are the key areas that we're seeing quite fruitful benefits immediately. The whole summarization piece, and especially the whole transcription piece, especially for those TAs that sit in meetings that have to transcribe, pull the transcription, and then try to summarize those transcriptions into a meeting note. So for us, I think that's a game changer initially, but I'm sure there are other use cases that we've obviously observed that we're going to see benefits from now that the tool will be out there with the users, and hopefully we'll receive some feedback in the coming weeks.
Fantastic. And Ken and Matt, so obviously I know you've not yet got Copilot licenses. I know you're Matt, I know your ego and soon will be. Do either of you have any kind of initial questions for the panel based on their first-hand experience?
So it's quite interesting. So I'm like Madassa, I'm the CIO for Midway, and so I come at this with a slightly kind of governance and sort of a different perspective to just the tooling itself. So we're looking at how do we make sure that we've got the right rules in place to make sure these things are used effectively in an appropriate fashion. So I'm very curious to hear what the rest of the team come to, like the aha moments. The reference to Teams and Outlook is very fascinating for me as well. But it's really interesting. People have mentioned transcription more than once, and Teams has always done transcription. So I was quite curious that this is now being sold as a Copilot piece, when actually I use transcription in Teams. I used it this morning, and when we talk about this, I'm also curious to how there's a return on investment. Is this a rebranding or rebadging of things that already exist? Are they genuinely better? There is step change between the two? So it'd be good to know just kind of how the team's experiencing those features that they're kind of pleased with as a build on something that was already in place in the Microsoft suite. So
I love that question, Ken, actually, because that was something I was going to ask opinions on later on. But Matt, did you want to add anything before I hand over to the panel?
Yeah, morning everyone. So I'm Matthew Albridge. I'm the Chief Digital and Information Officer for Hillingdon Council. So that's a local authority, kind of West London. If you know where Heathrow is, we've got Heathrow on our patch. So I've just been working with Max and my team to develop the business case. Everything in my world, local authority's got no money, so having to do business cases for all of this, and I'm in the camp of go slow to go fast with Copilot. So I think my question to the panel is how much of it is it a nice to have productivity tool for people across the organisation to do some nice bits and bobs that make people's life a little bit easier, or how much of it is a game changer to organisations to really drive profit for some, savings for me? Let me give a couple of examples. So we've got reduced budgets quite a fair amount. So we've got to save 25 million quid out of our budget next year. So things like how do we reduce the number of people we have to do things like freedom of information requests, complaints? How do we use it as a tool for social workers to go into meeting their clients and have the conversation and the action straight into the line of business system as a tool, so we can do more social care visits, for example. So it's nice to summarize emails. It's nice to do some of those, like the helpful things, but it's got to drive businesses moving forward to deliver the value we need it to have.
That's really good. And in a second, Max, if you don't mind, I appreciate you can't answer officially on their behalf, but it'd be good just to get your collective view, I guess, on where you've seen those hero moments with some of the clients that we're working with, and where you've seen similar kind of feedback. I mean, if I look at the team stuff, is interesting, and in that I remember a slide that Microsoft used to show about the need for Teams Premium and the need for Copilot, and it's interesting how those things are blurred together. Actually, just covering your point, Ken, in that you're right, Teams has done transcription for a couple of years now. Microsoft bought out a premium license for Teams that did what they called intelligent recap, where it would not only take notes, but after the meeting, as long as it was recorded and transcribed, Teams will create AI generated meeting notes. So it would, rather than you having to read the transcript, it would kind of gather everything together after the event and kind of go, look, these are the key things that were spoken about. These are the key trends. These are what I think are actions and those kind of things. And that's the Teams. So that's a non-Copilot feature within Teams. Where I personally see, and I'll hand over to the rest of you for your feedback in a second, where I personally see the value of Copilot in Teams is, and it's worth noting that if you've got Copilot, you don't need the Teams premium license to do the recap. So you get the intelligent recap feature with Copilot as well. But what you can do with Teams, Copilot in Teams, is you can literally just ask questions as you go along. So if you miss something in the meeting and you're in it, you can simply ask it and say, for example, what it can say, and it will come back and tell you, exactly what you missed. If you want to understand, if something's raised in the middle you don't quite understand, you can ask it to clarify that point. And it can obviously leverage internal company data for that, or it can go and search the internet depending on your kind of elements. It can create you actions on the fly. You can ask it things like, can you suggest some points? This meeting's running a bit slow. What can I do to move it on? So you can kind of interact with it almost like as a coach during the meeting, which I find quite useful. And the other really key thing for me, which we've only enabled recently, is that you don't have to record or transcribe the meeting in order to use Copilot. And to me, that's a game changer, right? So we have a lot of meetings internally which are would be deemed confidential. So there's always a little bit of a reluctance to want to record meetings because you've got a transcript hanging around, you've got a recording hanging around. But depending on how you set permissions up for Copilot, you can enable transcription. So you can enable Copilot without transcription, which means that while the meeting is running, you can interact with Copilot yourself, ask it questions, those kind of things, ask it to summarize the meeting, give you meeting notes, give you actions. But the minute the meeting's ended, all that history disappears. So, there is no, so think of it as your transcript is essentially locally cached under your own profile when the meeting kind of goes. For me, that's a game changer because you can use Copilot on any meeting as long as you're hosting it at the moment in your organisation, and use Copilot for questions and answers. So, I mean, panel, have you? What's been your experience of those? Picking up on Ken's point, what's been your experiences of using Copilot in Teams?
I'm happy to jump in, Rob. I think the main thing with the transcription, I think to your point, it's really about the time saving, and I think in some ways it can be really, really powerful, but it comes down to, like with a lot of technologies, it's about the education and awareness of what you can get out of it, and I think that's the big missing piece at the moment. We're trialing it at LNQ at the very least anyway, based on what we've heard, based on what we've read, and then we're poking at it from that kind of pilot standpoint. But we've seen this before. We've seen this new feature with Microsoft. We've seen this new thing, and we'll throw it at our employees, at our at our users, but it won't get the adoption because people aren't aware of how to make the most out of it. And actually, when you start poking at it and trying it, so the recap function is fantastic, because it actually means that you can get a summary if you missed a meeting without having to watch an hour. So you're saving yourself potentially 45 minutes. You spend 15 minutes, you get just or 5 minutes or however long it takes you to read. So that's the bit, and that can only work if people are aware that function exists and to utilize that. And the governance is really important. So I think Ken and Madassa were talking about the governance. We're looking at it from a governance standpoint. It's that it's that embracing of that technology for the organization. So the feedback we'll give from the pilot through the steering group is actually about, well, what are the benefits? What are the risks? What's the return on investment? Actually, because it's not cheap. But then in the grand scheme of it, if you look at ChatGPT versus Copilot, ChatGPT for the paid version, which gives you an element of privacy and working in your own context, is $20 a month. Microsoft is $30 a month, but it adds into a lot more different things. So you have to weigh these things up. So we were looking at ChatGPT as an alternative to Copilot when Microsoft was saying, well, you need minimum 300 licenses. So we're like, okay, we'll just go to ChatGPT and learn AI and what it can do through that. And the difference is, I think Ken made a point earlier. It's generative AI versus AI. So it's not, I think transcription and what it could do before was general machine learning, whereas this is about generating a response that we can understand, that we can literally share if we wish to, without having to do a lot more work behind it. And that's the difference. It isn't a rebadging of what already exists. It is actually taking that and moving it forward. And I think it will get better because it learns. So it will use the context, to your point, Rob, around data that already exists, the data that we currently have. And that's what we're trying to break. Can it access data we shouldn't have access to from a authentication standpoint? That's what we're looking at as much as what it can do from the context of the organization. So I think for us, it's that it is adding value and it's saving us time, but we're still on the journey to how can we really leverage that even more.
Fantastic. Anyone else got any specifics they want to pick up on that? Or?
I think to Go's point around governance, we've also been stress testing the security behind this tool, because they say that it only goes and accesses the data that you have been permissioned for, and to some degree, I think that does seem to be working as it should do so far. I think from our perspective, where I've really found one feature really useful is that M365 chatbot that sits within Teams, and having the ability to actually interrogate your organization based on what you have access to, and for it to then provide you the data. So, for example, I had to create a report for my board, and I had questions around when was my last penetration test. So rather than me going and fetching and searching for that document on my network, I just asked the question, when was my last penetration test? Obviously, I have access to my security folder within my IT directory. It pulled my data back, and it was pretty impressive. So then I started querying other questions, and I was getting the responses as I expected based on my data. And one of the feature I found really useful was when I actually asked it to go and give me a summary of my 2024 projects. And I know I created an IT project file in PowerPoint in my directory, and it's basically summarized in bullets. So I think The feature which I find really powerful is the fact that it can access your organizational data that you have access to, or your permission to, which allows you to then really use Copilot in a different stream. I mean, yes, we've had users test ChatGPT, but that's web-based answering. But whereas the tool here is the opposite. It's actually interrogating your own data, which I think is the most powerful feature so far, especially with some of the tooling that I've tested.
I think on that as well. I think the other thing I think that makes it really powerful is, firstly, the fact that it's got access not only to your data, but the context as well. So, because it understands, it understands who my manager is, it understands who my team are. So I can, one of the things that I have got into quite a good habit, I think it's a good habit of doing on a Monday morning, is I ask it for a reminder of any perceived actions that I haven't done that I've been asked through my peers, right? Yeah. So from our leadership team, I'll ask it questions around those things, and it knows who those people are. So it knows who my peers are. It occasionally does some very weird things. There's a member of our marketing team that it seems to be convinced that works for me that doesn't, but generally speaking, it gets the size of my team right. I think the second thing is the fact that it's in the context of the applications that we live in. So we talked about, obviously, the value of it within teams, and whilst I think there is still some work to be done in some of the core applications and things, the fact that you've got Copilot in all of the applications, your core office applications, whether that's OneNote or Excel or Word or PowerPoint, just there makes it really accessible as well. So you're not going off, as you say, Madassa, to a website, copying and pasting information, getting it to do something with it and bringing it back. And I think as the product sets evolve, and I think it's one of my customers said to me last week, you need to bear in mind that they were an very early adopter, and they said you need to also bear in mind we are using this product in its worst possible state. It is brand new. This is evolving very quickly. The roadmap for Copilot's got about 25 items on it at the moment, but I imagine very quickly that'll be bigger than the team's roadmap, right? It's gonna massively grow. Max, did you want to share any anecdotes from some of the clients you've been engaged with? I know you're working a lot.
Yeah, so we talk about aha moments. There's two parts to that. So one is how we get to those aha moments. It's really quite important, right? So some of the basics, but even some of the simple things, like Go, you mentioned about like meetings. There's and the behavioural piece that sits behind that. One of the things is starting to get people as part of the adoption process into treating it as a way of working in slightly different ways. So how many meetings do we all go to, and it's kind of woolly what the actions are. Now that should never be the case. It should be part of the behaviour. Obviously some meetings are updates and things like that, but it should be part of the behaviour, which is, okay, actively think about what the actions are and who's assigned to them, so that we have that as an output from that meeting. And it sounds silly, but the effectiveness of those meetings should go up. It's a tough one to measure, but it is a behaviour that should be part of how we all go about things now, because the tool should be working on our behalf and then assigning those out for us. So it's not something that should requires any more effort. It just means that we should do that as something that's part of our process. So we're treating the tools as a proper assistant and to our benefit as a kind of collective. You jumping in there, Goa?
I was just gonna, as you were talking, it got me thinking, and I like pushing the boat, and I like really pressing these things. And I think the one thing, and this may already be the case, I think the one thing that's missing. So I agree, Max. Absolutely, that's what it should be doing. It should be driving better behaviour in meetings. Because I'm sure most of us probably wasted 80% of our time in meetings with 20% output, which is actually useful for us. But actually, what the bit for me that is missing is that ability to talk to it. So for me, what would take it to that next level is, rather than typing in prompts on PowerPoint that says, right, can you do this for me? Can you do that for me? Actually me saying, can you just adjust this and change that? Which it would just use the voice recognition that's already available to us and leveraging the Gen AI. And I think that's where it becomes really powerful, because I literally, you can take, and this is another example of what I've tested, is taking PowerPoint and say, right, can you convert this document into a PowerPoint deck, a keynote? And it kind of just regurgitated what was already in the in the document, and it kind of did it okay. And then I tried to do a bit more with it, and it didn't do much. But actually, where it becomes super powerful is, right, can you make this more interesting, and it will go away and do it, and it's almost taking prompt engineering, which is a weird term anyway, but prompt engineering and turning it into voice engineering, which then just that much more of a game changer for me anyway, at least.
Yeah, I'm with you totally. And that's almost, I mean, that's going to come, isn't it? It's not there yet, but it will come in terms of how we interact with it will become simpler, and it will get smarter, as Rob says. It's the worst iteration of the tool possible, right? At the moment, not to say it's bad, it's just it will definitely improve. So those things are without question going to come and make it easier for us to interact with it and get what we want. To go back, sorry.
No, sorry, go on.
Sorry. So to go back to the,
I was raising my hand there. So just one other piece that came on. So and Matthew touched on this when he did his introduction. One of the other pieces, and I'm really curious because it's one thing to talk about this assistant and everything. And my CEO, he saw an advert somewhere where there was percentages about reduction in in overhead. Like it was an insane number, like 75%. And so I mean, the thing is, when we talk about this and he's saying it's the first iteration, how are people seeing such massive returns? Or is it a little bit like a fudging of the numbers? Because we're kind of having some contradictory conversations here. We're saying it does do some things for us, but nobody here is really talking to massive efficiencies. Microsoft's pushing advertising that really does suggest this is, if it really is as good as I say it is, we should see that immediately. And it's kind of, is it snake oil salespeople, or is it actually, if it's done perfectly, you really do see that, right? And the thing is, nobody can do perfect. So where is the happy middle ground? Because I'm not going to adopt a product, quite candidly, that if this is the worst iteration, I'll wait until there's an iteration that actually is worthwhile investing in, because I haven't got, like, my business is not prepared to sacrifice the development cost of our teams for Microsoft, right? Come to us with a product we want to use versus one that is still beta in effect. So have you got, like with all the other clients, like that hero moment, to quote Rob, where they go, actually, it really does give us half our time back. It is worth that thing alone. So
the answer is as woolly as you'd probably expect, unfortunately. And the reason it's woolly is, right, there are two levels in my mind. There are ubiquitous ways of working using the tool, which will benefit us all, like managing a busy inbox and working with it in meetings, things like that. They affect everyone who's an information worker. To find the real value for your organization is the next challenging part, right? It's how individual users across different roles and responsibilities across the organization currently work. So the process that we go through is quite a hand-holding process. So we start with making sure that users are able to see success. That's the starting point. They've got to be able to do those basics in order to interact with the tool, get confident with it, get comfortable, and grow from there. So giving them the basics and the ubiquitous ways of doing it is the right thing. So they're not scared of the tool. They're seeing some success with it. They're happy to give it a bit of a try. Because the real reality is for vast majority of users, if you give them it, and to go as example with like PowerPoint, it feels like it should just work, right? I ask it to do something, it should just work. If it doesn't work, your average user is not going back for that. They're not going back again to continue to trial it. And it'll actually unconsciously put them off trying it in other ways because it's just not quite there. It's not working. It's rubbish, whatever terminology they might decide to come up with. The goal is to support users through that process and make sure that those with a bit more knowledge and a bit more tenacity to stick with the tool and find those value pieces as part of a controlled trial, support the user through that process. So to give it an example, we sit with a user, what's mundane, what's boring, what's repetitive, what could you do with getting rid of in your week? We find out how they work. We draw some of that information out and we work with them to determine how we can help them use that tool. Because I do believe we're at a stage where if we allow people just to have a go at it, the vast majority of people will treat it like Alexa and they will treat it like it's a basic tool, and they're not going to take that next step into getting quite clever with prompt engineering and finding what works within your environment, within your organization. So it's a long-winded and woolly answer, Ken, to say I wouldn't trust users to find that value for you. I would work with them closely to ensure that you draw the value out and then can proliferate that across the organization in ways that are going to add value. So specifically targeting key parts of the organization, thinking that let's find the value and then use that to trial for that purpose. So really setting up your trial so it's more than a technical trial, it is about a value trial, and it's identifying specifically where value lies in order to create a business case that says, yeah, this is worth it in these areas, not so much over here yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, I think Matt, Max, on your point of the adoption thing, and it's I've been using it properly in a production environment for a month, literally a month on Thursday, and I've seen similar, very, Outlook and Teams were easy, right? Easy because I think for me the reason they're easy is because they're in the moment, right? You're in an email, you come back from a meeting, had a day off, had a couple of days off, whatever it will be. I've got a couple of days off this week. It's half term, taking the kids away, and I'll come back on Monday and I will have threads and threads of emails, right? And for me to be able to use and actually forget who it was that mentioned the M365 chat bot in Teams, or just the Copilot.microsoft.com, just about to ask that, almost, I've been away for 3 days, what are the most important emails I've had from my team, or what important emails have I had from customers, right? So understanding external versus internal. Those things to me are massive game changers, because that you are probably talking about an hour's worth of difference between sifting through that kind of catch up on your emails, catch up on your, before you then go through your Teams chat and channel chat and all those kind of things, or recap on meetings that you tentatively accept so that they're in your diary so that you can pick up on the recap later, and those kind of things. To me, that's absolutely massive. I think you then move on to the other application estates where that more heavily relies on good data governance. So actually having data that is structured in a way that it's easy to find, that having access to that data is obviously important. So one of the things I find in just the group we're using here to test is you do need to test those different prompts, because I could ask a question and have access to different content to other people. So it's not like you can repeat a prompt to necessarily get exactly the same answer. And that's something I've found that's quite interesting is, you do it, and Microsoft encourage this through things like Center of Excellence around sharing your prompts. And I think that's great. You probably see these on Twitter where people are drawing, people are using Designer or Adobe Firefly and stuff to create images, and people share their prompts, and you never quite get the same thing when you tweak it, because it's kind of moved around a little bit. So I think that's quite an interesting point to note as well. And I think it's also about, that prompting is quite a science, and I think without overcomplicating it, it's your point, Max, around people use it like Alexa. I think they do. And I think you need to really think about, if it was a human you were talking to and you were trying to explain to somebody what you wanted, you wouldn't ask them in one sentence. You would sit down with them and explain what you're trying to do. Yeah. So I think thinking about, the context of what you want, the scenario that you need, how you want that response generated. So whether you want that response to be almost just factual, or whether you want to be that, from a marketeer's perspective, or aligned to a finance person, or, more in the middle, I think is also really, really important. That's probably my take on those things. I'm going to thank you, Ken, for just pointing us to the chat actually from the public. So firstly, thank you everyone for your comments. I'm going to take a couple of those if that's all right, and I might pass off to some of you for some answers. So we've had a request for a live demo. I wasn't planning on doing a live demo today, so Ricardo, no, but please ping us afterwards, and happy to arrange a live demo with you and show you some of these things. There's also some great videos I can point you at that Microsoft and we've also created that just to give you kind of an insight to some of those things. One of the other questions, Ricardo, you asked about was, does Copilot work with other apps? So absolutely. So Copilot works across currently most of the Microsoft 365 apps. It also has deep hook integration into the Microsoft Graph. So essentially anything that is plugged into the Graph, it can access. That also means that if you've got third-party data that is connected to the Microsoft Graph, then you can access that as well. So a lot of that is still, I wouldn't say it's in preview, but it's still going through development. So you can build your own Copilots essentially. So you can create your own chatbots that live in Teams or live on a website that just look at certain aspects of data. If you work with if you've got lots of on-prem data, for example, then there are connectors that you can either buy or build or deploy that will enable some of that data to also be ingested into the graph. And you can do it in a couple of ways to make that available. So pretty much, there's not really a limit into what it does. I think, that the core iteration of what Microsoft have built has been around focusing on data within the Microsoft ecosystem, if you like. So think of it as all your 365 apps and services, but of course any other data that's plugged into those things. Some of the applications are, I would say, still in preview. So there is a Copilot for Excel. If you use it, it actually still says preview, so it is still in preview. It's very limited currently. It's very good for visualizing data for. It's a whiz at pivot charts, is probably what I would say at the moment. There's a massive update coming. I can't tell you exactly what, but there's a massive update coming very soon into Excel that's going to really kind of transform. There's a lot of feedback being given around how empowering people to use Excel in far better ways. So thank you for that, Ricardo and Camille. So we're using the product at worst. Yeah, so the point here about the worst possible state, I knew I probably shouldn't use that phrase. But, essentially, if we think about, we're using a product that is, we don't have versions of products anymore, right? For, anyone that uses Microsoft 365, there's no versions really. The products are continually evolving. Copilot, even when it was in very early preview, it was still paid, right? There is a huge amount of compute required to process the kind of data that we're talking about here, both at your tenancy level and also obviously in a chat perspective. So it's continually evolving, right? I think, is it ready? Certainly from my experience, I think, yes, it's ready. Are there some things I would wish it would have? Yes, there are. Will those things get added rapidly? Yes, they will. I think would probably be my initial feedback. But I think part of the reason that this panel is interesting and what we're talking about is really about trying to find where that value is. And I think, what I find with a lot of organizations is, and even internally, is people will be using things like ChatGPT, the free version of Copilot, other apps. I was with a customer last week who, discovered as part of a security review we were doing that they had 3 or 4, I think it was 4 actually, third-party apps that have been deployed into Teams to try and do things like transcription and note-taking and some of these kind of things. So I think there's also a large part of, be mindful what people are already doing, because everyone's quite excited by this stuff. I think, ChatGPT took the world by storm last year. It makes sense to properly evaluate the tools in 365 because that's kind of where the majority of us spend our time. So I hope that answered those questions. So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left, but I guess what I'm just keen to pick up on really is, we've talked about some of the good things. We've talked about some of the, I guess, less good things, areas where we want development. Would you say, I want to pick up on the point you raised, Go and Co on security. How have you found those? I mean, some of you touched on that point about, we think it's okay. How have you kind of found the view of these kind of technologies from a security standpoint? Are people kind of blasé about it? Do you find there's actually quite a lot of concern about what Copilot could surface?
I can kind of jump in here, and I think, I mean, we're quite a different infosec team. We're not one that's like averse to everything new that comes our way, and we need to run away from it. We want to embrace it because we need to enable the organization. We need to work with the organization and technology. I think there is a real concern about this running away from us. I think that's the concern, that, you know, this is quicker than anything we've experienced from a technology standpoint, and that's saying something considering how quick technology is already. You know, where things change, evolve. You know, Google were the game changers in that, in terms of throwing new stuff out all the time. Microsoft are now doing that, and now we've got Copilot. So we had Sales Copilot land on our devices because we're evergreen. We weren't even ready for it. We weren't even aware of that. Microsoft threw it at us. And then when people start using it and they get used to it, then taking that away or being able to govern it according to, you know, what, you know, Ken and Madassa has been saying, is that you need some, you know, guardrails around that. You need to do it in the right way. We need to embrace it in the right way. So I think it is scary, but I think there is that kind of, you know, sci-fi scenario which doesn't exist, which everyone kind of thinks about AI and Gen AI, and it's not there. It's not going to start doing its own thing and take over the world. I think it's more about, you know, bringing it in the right context, adopting it so that people can't go and interrogate exec confidential data without having the permissions to do so, and that readiness of data state. Ken, I know you want to jump in.
And that's just the piece that I'm curious about, because my organization is relatively small. Historically, the way things were governed, it was centrally focused, etc. And Madassa mentioned the fact that you can go across and search your estate and you can ask questions. The trouble we have is that we don't know what we don't know. So all of a sudden, somebody could ask a question: can I see my boss's P60? And lo and behold, because they've got access, they get to see a P60 that they should not be seeing, right? So, and so this is the piece where, and you say it's running away so fast. My thing with this is there's a reticence to dive headlong into even a pilot piece until I actually know what I should be looking for, because once you go through this pain points, you start calling out, wow, okay, look, and we've touched about this in our conversation separately, but you know, the semantic indexing was a key piece that I thought was essential for you to be able to go away and query that. It sounds like now out the box, it works without that piece.
But I think that's the thing, Ken. I think you need to do it to know it. You can't just say, right, this is what might happen. And I think that's the
but I can't afford for one of my colleagues to find my boss's P60, right? So
no, but what I'm saying, if you got one license or two licenses, you could interrogate, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to push it. We're trying to ask it these, and I don't think any of us can say it will do something until we push it.
Yeah.
Beg pardon. If I can just jump in here, I think what most organizations should be concerned about before necessarily going and adopting Copilot licenses is doing the security work behind the scenes. No one likes it. It's horrible. It's it's difficult to get it past the business to say you need to improve your security. But if you don't do have those basic guardrails in place, like ensuring that your permissions are set correctly in SharePoint, that you have limited global admins inside your organization, there's no point doing Copilot, because the people will love it because it will give you answers that you probably shouldn't have, and that could be very damaging and dangerous to your business. So yes, Copilot has definite benefits in it, but the only way that you can truly, I think, take advantage of that is by doing the prep work behind the scenes. Is having those, having the pilot groups, but having your security or your infosec team do the necessary checks on your current infrastructure to make sure that you have those necessary security permissions and guardrails in place. Otherwise, you are just opening yourself up for data to be shared in places that it shouldn't be. Yes, it's all self-contained in your own tenant, but if you have, the wrong person with the wrong access to a random HR SharePoint that was set 4 years ago and no one's done any checks to see whether those teams still need to exist or the data inside there is still legit, you're going to discover that. So you need to have retention policies. You need to have security levels. And again, no one likes doing it. They take ages to do, and they're never finished. if I'm honest. But I think you have to have some of those building blocks in place before you can start to go down this road.
And Alex, that was my point at the start about I'm stepping back and trying to make sure the governance is completely in place as best we can.
And they don't like, and sadly they don't like hearing that because they want the shiny new tool. And I think a lot of these companies are very good at promoting, what it can do. They have these fancy adverts and everyone thinks it's amazing. But then what they don't tell you is that, if you start to have these conversations with Microsoft, they will say, have you done this? Have you done that? There are readiness checks that you can do. I would urge people to reach out to partners. I'm not trying to promote Cisilion, but partners like Cisilion or others that can actually help you through this and just calm businesses down a little bit before they just go gung-ho and potentially have some issues.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good point to wrap up actually on this point. I'm really glad that you raised that, because I think Microsoft have actually very early on, all the way through the process, from their kind of readiness, made a really big point about the way in which the security model works. So, just to add to that point, Copilot operates under the user context, right? So it can only access the content that it has got access to. And this I think we touched on this in a previous session, but this is very similar to when Microsoft released Delve and essentially the Office 365 search. So, when we think about that example, Ken, of can I find the P60? If you go into office.com and search, right, if you can find a P60, then Copilot can find it as well. So, what happens with the semantic index is the first time you allocate a license to a user, Microsoft instigates this kind of stealth upgrade in the background to Microsoft Search. That's how this stuff starts to build. It takes about 4 days. So actually the onboarding experience takes about 4 days, a bit longer actually, but from what you immediately start to see, it works backwards in time. It's no different, right, to those things. The other thing I think that's really important that you touched on, Alex, about security is also thinking about classification. So one of the other things that happens is, and this is something that I'm really pleased works nicely now, is that if you've got access to content, but that content is labeled and is protected, right? So it's internal only, for example. You, of course, have access to that. You ask Copilot to go and generate an email based upon a topic, right? That topic you have access to, it's on a file that's protected. When Copilot generates that content, if that content has got a information protection label assigned to it, the content it produces also is labeled with the same thing. So it does a pretty good job at trying to mitigate any accidental data leakage across boundaries. That's an important point to note. But to the point you made, Alex, it's really, really critical that we think about that security stuff. And again, Microsoft are really good. If you're a managed partner with Microsoft, they've got workshops that will go through these. So a lot of the readiness workshops that some of the panel have talked about today go into these things, right? A lot of the partners, we certainly have, will have, almost Copilot aligned security reviews that will look at some of these things and help you test some of these things. I think the fact that you can now buy a handful of licenses makes it very easy to start looking at those things. I think it's really interesting to hear from all of you actually that those initial pilots, almost pre-pilots, right, which I think is a good word for them, have been around not just expectation of the product set, because we know that's evolving and that's a lot of that is down to the prompt and those kind of things, but actually is around, can we give our organization a certainty that Copilot isn't going to break our security? What it might do is expose where there are gaps in our security or where we need to improve posture. And that's probably the last point I would make. Outside of that, I think the other thing really, really clear that I think has been said a lot today is we do need to think of this as, a big technology project. As such, we need to really think about that business change and adoption. It's going to be really, really important to ensure that we get value. I think if we just give people a license and expect them to save 20 hours a month in productivity, that's unlikely to happen. The team that you assemble as part of your center of excellence need to be, as Max said, working with people to look at what they do. And I think the reason I think so many of us think about Teams and Outlook is we all spend so much time in meetings. I think, COVID probably created this huge meeting FOMO thing, because meetings are all online now. We all get FOMO. I joined so many meetings that I probably don't need to join. And in fact, I have been in the last couple of weeks joining far less meetings, because I know actually I can just recap them very quickly later. Some of those things are, yes, they're a Teams premium thing rather than necessarily just a Copilot thing. But to be able to simply ask Copilot what I've missed, what happened in that meeting that I didn't attend. There's a meeting going on now that I'm not in. First thing I'll do when I finish this is just ask what I missed. And I think that's a really valuable thing. Listen, everybody, thank you so much for your input. I hope for those of you that haven't got Copilot yet as well on the panel, that's been useful. I know we're working with some of you on this adoption side of things. For everyone listening, thank you. For the panel, thank you for your input, as always, really valuable, and look forward to hearing more in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks.
Everyone, thank you.